Hey, Bastish B here for 64K and welcome to another episode of New Retro. So if you've never watched an episode of New Retro before, the basic premise is I play a new game for an old system. And the thing about all these new games that are being made for older systems is that usually they're inspired by original games, like games that may have come out in the arcade or on the actual system itself. So let's take a quick look at today's games. So as you can tell from the intro, we're covering 3 games today as opposed to the usual 2. Now the main game of focus is the original version of Commando on the Commodore 64, but that game was obviously inspired by the original arcade version by Capcom. And then today's new game is going to be Commando Arcade Special Edition. This came out a couple years ago, and this is basically an enhanced version of the original Commodore 64 port. So let's get started with the originals. Commando was originally an arcade game that blasted its way into the arcade scene in 1985 by Capcom. The game was directed by one of their most talented designers at the time, Takuro Fujiwara, who was also responsible for other classics like Ghosts and Goblins and Bionic Commando. The game itself was a run and gun in the best sense, where you play Super Joe, an American soldier taking out a whole army single-handedly, all the while rescuing captured POWs. The gameplay was simple and addictive, like all good arcade games should be. Keep running, shooting and grenading everything in sight, and was accompanied by an excellent soundtrack score by Tamayo Fujiwara that would become a whole other legendary beast on future ports of the game. Capcom did release a sequel to Commando in the form of Mercs in 1989, which was considered an excellent run and gun game as well. Many versions of Commando were ported, including a remixed NES version, the Amiga and the C64 versions. Now let's jump over to the original Commodore 64 version of Commando by Elite, released in 1985. Yes, the same year as the arcade. Elite, the company, were no stranger to arcade conversions either, as they were going to prove time and time again with C64 conversions of Paperboy, Space Harrier, and the UK version of Akari Warriors. They tasked Chris Butler to program the game, and he was responsible for later C64 gems like 720 Degrees, Battleships, Ghosts and Goblins, and Power Drift. So to say they had chosen the right guy for the job was an understatement. Not only did he get the look of the game really close to the arcade, but it played, in my opinion, slightly better, with the relentless fast-paced action really fully intact. The negatives are that the game is really short, and only has 3 of the 8 arcade levels, and can be completed in about 5 minutes. Having said that, Elite did insist that Chris make the game a single loader, which means the entire game had to be loaded to memory. Therefore, including all 8 levels would have been kind of impossible without making the game multi-loader, which Elite was not fond of at the time, also seen as their excellent but also level-missing version of Ghosts and Goblins proved. Fortunately, somebody hired the C64's Sid Beethoven himself, Rob Hubbard, to do the music, and boy did he deliver. His tune is an extended and vastly superior version of Tamayo Fujiwara's arcade track that is absolutely brilliant, and was completed in less than a day. Now that's efficiency. The game itself has great graphics and animation. Using the spacebar to throw grenades is a little bit awkward, and the game does suffer from some slowdown and sprite flickering, but overall it's a really well implemented fun version of the arcade game that is admittedly short, but well worth your time. Okay, now that we got the inspirations out the way, let's take a look at the new version of Commando on the Commodore 64. 2015 was the year the group Nostalgia released their redo of the 1985 version of Commando and tried to make it a much closer version of the arcade than the original was. If you don't know who Nostalgia is, it's a C64 cracking group that cracks games and makes awesome demos for the C64 demo scene community, and they were formed by Zyron and Mr. Alpha in 1995. And are also responsible for the excellent redo of Ghosts and Goblins, which I'll feature in a future episode. So what makes this C64 version so good compared to the already well done original? Well, let's start with the fact that they now have all 8 levels from the arcade intact, a brilliant new title screen, tons of in-game graphical enhancements such as the helicopter from the original arcade version, and they've sorted out the slowdown, and most importantly they have mapped the grenades to a longer press of the fire button, Who Dares Wins 2 style, making the game much easier to control. Naturally, also being a cracking group who've got an excellent selection of built-in cheats for you to use or ignore at your whim. It's quite an amazing job they have done here, and it really is an impressive upgrade. Now the only thing they did wrong was try to remix Rob Hubbard's original music track, and that was not the best of ideas. It
it just doesn't sound right. But luckily you get the choice of the remix music or the original, so maybe even they weren't that confident in their own remix themselves. Overall though, it's a brilliant version that is a must play, and you can download it for free from the CSDB site, which I'll put a link to in the video description.
Okay, and that brings another episode to an end. If you want to find all these games, the Commando original arcade version by Capcom is available on a lot of their different compilations, shouldn't be too hard to find. The original Commodore 64 version of Commando is available on physical form, on tape and disc. You can also pick it up digitally if you do a search, and you can play it through your VAS or your C64 Mini, it works perfectly. And Commando Arcade Special Edition, the new Commodore 64 version, I'll put a link in the description below, and you can go straight to the place where you can download it. It's free, so that's pretty awesome. I played it on my Commodore 64 Mini also. It's a digital version and it works flawlessly, so you'll have no problem playing that, and I hope you enjoy it. And thanks for joining me, Bastish B at 64K. I hope you had a good time. If you could like and subscribe, that would be greatly appreciated, and I'll see you next time. Cheers!